Okay, so folks, we are talking today about natural selection. And let me move my thing here. So, in general, we start by talking about Charles Darwin. And the reason is because Darwin is generally credited with coming up with the idea of natural selection. He obviously didn't invent it as it is a natural process. But there's a little bit of debate about whether he actually came up with it first or somebody else did. In general, that's who we think of when we think of natural selection. So, in 1831, he gets this invitation to join the HMS Beagle as the ship's naturalist, and the ship takes 5 years to sail around the world, and he gets to survey the coast of South America, parts of Africa, over to New Zealand, Australia, and specifically the Galapagos Islands right here are really important for his observations. He filled dozens and dozens of notebooks about plants and animals and the geology that he saw. He collected tons of specimens. He crated them up, sent them home with other ships. He did a lot of basic research while he was on this ship. So the Galapagos Islands are really the big thing where he made a lot of connections in his brain about how things work. So the important observations that he made first was just how much diversity there was among living things. There's massive amounts. There's tons of differences. He also found remains of ancient organisms, both plants and animals, and he started to think about how those could be related to current plants and animals. Basically, he looked at the characteristics of the organisms on the Galapagos Islands, which were these very isolated islands, to discover how species are actually connected to each other in some way, shape, or form. So, for the most part, biological diversity means the variability among living organisms. This basically just means that every individual is slightly different than every other individual. This was a unique thought because we knew people were very variable, right? No, there weren't two people that were exactly the same. There was always a little bit of difference. He discovered that that is also true of plants and animals. Um, Fossils were preserved remains or traces of organisms that lived a really long time ago in the past. He had no idea how long ago, just that they lived a long time ago. He also observed characteristics of things like iguanas and tortoises and finches, as well as lots of other organisms, and that those animals on the Galapagos Islands were very different than the animals over on the mainland. So, he also discovered that the finches on the Galapagos Islands were adapted to their environment. Some of them had bigger beaks, some of them had smaller beaks, some of them had wider beaks, all based on the environment that those finches were living in. And adaptation basically has to be a trait that's helpful. If it's not helpful, we don't consider it an adaptation, it's just a variation. So adaptations have to be helpful. Darwin reasoned that populations of plants and animals could change over time, um, generally over lots and lots of generations. So we're talking multiple generations, depending on how long something lives. That could be hundreds of years or thousands of years. It would depend, right, on the organism, so that these organisms became better adapted to their environment. So there are a couple of principles here for natural selection. First off, natural selection is a process. Individuals who are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. This is pretty obvious, right? Most of us are like, yeah, it's if the animals die out early, they're not going to have little baby animals. So, if there's lots of turtles that are competing for limited resources, then they're the ones that have a helpful variation or adaptation are going to be more likely to survive. So, for this, we talk about overpopulation. There's a lot more. individuals that are in the population then can actually survive there. And some of them have a variation. In this example, it's speed. The faster turtles get to the water first and don't get eaten by the crabs or the seagulls, right? So they are more likely to reproduce and have little baby turtles. There's competition for survival, meaning the faster they are, the the better they can compete with other turtles. They're going to survive better than other turtles because they have this adaptation or this variation that helps them. They survive, they reproduce. So the whole idea here is that over a long period of time, the population changes to have more of these helpful variations, and the ones that are harmful, like being super slow, might be a super harmful variation in this set. And so those would start to disappear or become less and less visible within the population. Center. So we're going to talk a little bit here about natural selection and what leads to it. So you have the big idea is that there's going to be more offspring than can survive. Members of the same species vary. They have different different traits, even within the same species. They have to compete for survival. There's not enough food, not enough water, not enough space, not enough something. That these species, if there's no competition, then there's no reason for one to do better than another. And so then you have selection, meaning some of the variations are helpful and some are not. Some make them better fit for that environment and some do not make them better fit for that environment. Environmental change can happen. Basically, environmental change just affects the organism's survival. So things like temperature or amount of water, these can change and therefore change which traits are selected for, which traits are selected for is the wrong word, which traits are helpful, right? Genes that help determine survival get passed from parent to offspring. If that didn't happen, then none of this would happen. So these 5 things kind of lead to these 4 causes leading to the effect of natural selection. So good luck, and we'll see you in the next video.